Tu Tien was sitting alone on the back step, crying. And I almost didn't stop. I need you to know that first. The first week Tu Tien came to live with us, she washed the rice 3 times before cooking it. I only washed mine once. I watched her and didn't say a word. I just thought, someone, somewhere, taught this girl that the 3rd wash matters. Or maybe no one did. Maybe she figured it out herself. Either way, she cared enough about a simple pot of rice to do it right when once would have been enough. That was the first thing I noticed about her. Not her smile, not how hard she worked. The rice. For those of you who are meeting her for the first time, Tu Tien is the woman my son Jack loves. She grew up without parents. She's carried things most people never have to carry. And she carries them quietly. So quietly that it's easy to look at her and think, she's fine, she's strong, she's okay. It fooled me, for longer than I'd like to admit. So, that evening, I came around the back of the house to hang laundry. Nothing in my head. I think I was wondering if I'd salted the soup enough. And then I saw her, Tu Tien, on the low stone step outside the kitchen door, knees pulled up, head down, crying. Not loud, the opposite of loud. The kind of crying that happens when someone has been holding it in for a long time, and something small, something so small you might not even notice it, finally gives way. I stopped walking, and here is where I have to be honest with you. My very first thought, was to go back inside. I know how that sounds, but I'm old, I get tired, and grief that doesn't belong to you is heavy to pick up. So I stood there, behind the corner of the house, out of sight, and I thought about it, turning around, leaving her to it. Then she made a sound. Barely a sound, just air. The kind that slips out when someone is trying very hard to make no sound at all. I went over. My knees hurt on that step. The stone was cold, and the height was wrong. And I was thinking about my knees the whole way down. Which sounds strange, but that's what happened. I sat beside her and said nothing. I learned a long time ago, what's wrong is not always a kind question. Sometimes it asks someone to perform their pain for you while they're still in the middle of it. So I didn't ask. She flinched when she felt me sit down, straightened up fast, started wiping her face. That reflex, that apology for being human. And she opened her mouth to say something. I put my hand over hers. She closed her mouth. And we just sat there. The sky went from orange to the deep blue that comes just before dark. The crickets started. Somewhere by the pond, a frog made one sound and then went quiet. My back started hurting around the time my knees stopped. She never told me what she'd been crying about. I never asked. When she finally looked up, eyes red, face very still, she gave me the smallest smile. Not happy, just, you're here. I squeezed her hand once. Then we went inside and made dinner together, side by side, not talking, just moving around each other the way women do when they've learned to share a kitchen. I keep coming back to that evening. Not the smile, not the hand, the moment before, standing behind that corner, the thought I had, go back inside. I almost did. That's the part I keep thinking about. Later that night, well past midnight, I got up for water. My joints wake me sometimes. Maybe you know how that is. The hallway was dark. I wasn't thinking about anything, just thirsty. And then, a line of light under Jack's door. I thought, lamp left on. He does that when he's tired. I almost kept walking, but then I heard his voice. Low, measured, the way Jack sounds when he's solving something, and the rest of the world has gone very quiet. He was on the phone at midnight. If I bring the training wheels in tomorrow morning, the small ones, the kind for children's bikes, can you weld extension bars onto them? Long enough that the wheels sit flat on the ground. Tu Tien has never ridden before. She's scared of falling. I need it completely stable, both sides. A pause. Make sure the welds hold. I don't want anything giving way on her. I stood in the dark hallway, water going warm in my hand, one hand flat against the wall. And what I felt, it wasn't pride. I want to be careful here because pride is the easy word, and it isn't quite right. What I felt was relief. The specific, quiet relief of someone who has been carrying a private fear for a very long time. Afraid that somewhere along the way she got something wrong, and finding out, at midnight, in a dark hallway, in her bare feet, that she didn't. I went back to my room, lay down, stared at the ceiling. I thought about Tu Tien on that step, about how she'd tried to hide it, how fast she'd straightened up. And I thought about my son on the phone at midnight, asking a stranger to make the welds strong. She was asleep by then, probably. He was checking the measurements. For her. I didn't sleep for a long time after that. Jack left early the next morning. No explanation, just gone. Tu Tien was already in the kitchen when he left. She always is. That morning it was sticky rice cakes, small and round, filled with sweet raisins, rice soaked from the night before. Everything laid out, her hands moving fast, humming something low to herself. She had no idea where he'd gone, but I did. I stood in the doorway and watched her work, and I held that secret carefully. The way you hold something you're afraid of dropping before it reaches the person it belongs to. I handed her an extra cloth for the basket, told her the cakes looked good. She smiled. She always smiles when someone notices. She packed up, put on her hat, walked to the market. She came back a few hours later, basket empty, cheeks flushed, feet sore. I could tell by the way she moved, the small adjustment she made with each step, though she would never say it. She sat down on the front step, took off her sandals, and rubbed her feet. Like this was just how things were. Like it had always been this way, and always would be. I watched her do it. She has walked to that market more times than I know, in heat like that, with a full basket, on foot. And every time, she comes home, sits on this step, takes off her sandals, rubs her feet, and never once says, "This is too much. Something needs to change." She just rubs her feet, and then gets up, and starts on dinner. Jack hadn't forgotten that it didn't have to be this way. That's the difference. That's the only difference. Then I heard it. Wheels on the path outside the gate. Tu Tien looked up. Jack came through, pushing a bicycle. Not a normal one. 2 iron bars extended from the back, one on each side, and at the end of each bar, a small wheel, flat against the ground, steady. Tu Tien went still. Jack wheeled it into the yard. No speech, no moment built up for effect. He just looked at her and said, "I heard you never learned to ride because you were scared of falling. On this one, Tu Tien, you won't fall." She looked at the bicycle, then at Jack, then at the bicycle again. I was watching her face. I know this girl's face now. I know what it does when she's trying to hold something in. The small stillness around her eyes, the way her jaw sets just slightly. She was holding a lot in. Her chin moved, once. And then Jack was beside her, hand on the handlebar, voice low. The same voice I had heard through the door at midnight. Exactly the same. "Look ahead, not down. Just pedal. I made sure the wheels will hold you." She pedaled, gripping the handles too tight, feet uncertain, and then moving, slowly at first, then less slowly. And then a sound came out of her. It started as something careful, something held, and became something it hadn't planned to be. She laughed. Not for anyone, not at anything in particular, just laughed. The full kind. The kind that comes from somewhere deep and takes over completely and doesn't ask permission. She went around the yard once, twice. Then she looked back at Jack. "Get on, I'll take you." And he looked at the bicycle, looked at her, and climbed on the back without a word. She took him around the farm, both of them laughing.
I stood on the porch. I'm not going to tell you I kept it together. I didn't. I cried. The kind that comes when you've been carrying something for days and your body just decides it's done. I cried for the step, for the midnight hallway, for every time she sat here and rubbed her feet and said nothing, for the welds on both sides. That evening, Jack played his flute.
He used to play when he was young. Years since he had. Tu Tien had asked him once, seen him play somewhere a long time ago, and never forgotten it. He sat outside as the light went down and he played. He missed a beat somewhere in the middle, stopped, found the phrase again, kept going. Tu Tien sat beside him with her eyes closed. He stopped and apologized. She didn't open her eyes. "Keep going," she said. "Just keep going." So he did. I could hear it from inside. I didn't go out to watch. I didn't need to.
I almost didn't go over to that step. I want you to remember that part, because everything that came after, the bicycle, the midnight phone call, the laughter in the yard, none of it would have meant anything to me if I had turned around. I would have missed it, all of it. How thin that line is, between seeing something and walking past it, between staying and going back inside. The woman who told me this story, Jack's mother, she didn't tell it the way I've told it to you. She told it the way people tell things they're afraid of losing. Slowly, stopping sometimes, going back to pick up a detail she'd dropped. At the end, she went quiet, a long quiet. Then she said, "I don't know what kind of mother I was. I never really know. But that night, in that hallway, hearing his voice through the door," she stopped, looked down at her hands, took a breath. I thought, okay, he's going to be all right. She didn't say anything after that, and I didn't either. Some things don't need a word after them, they just need a moment. So I'll give you one now.